So the next topic is implementing transfer pricing technology in a changing environment. Our moderator, sitting right next to me here, is Kelly Lear, Senior Manager of Global Implementation Services for ONESOURCE Operational Transfer Pricing at Thomson-Reuters. Welcome, Kelly. Sitting next to her, it's going to be silly time right now.
It's going to be a good one.
Yeah. Sitting next to her is Cristina Traviesa, EMEA Tax Process Design Coordinator for DuPont. Cristina is part of One DuPont, a key project the company is undertaking for changing their ERP system, as well as a transformation of financial processes, including tax sensitization. Welcome. And next to her is RODRIGO ARANA, Global Transfer Pricing Manager for TEREX Corporation. RODRIGO is currently working on implementing operational transfer pricing software to improve the accounting integrity of intercompany transactions. And on the far end, the man, the myth, the legend, who's been on multiple panels today, Andrew Weaver, Senior Solution Consultant with Thomson-Reuters ONESOURCE. So welcome, panel. Thank you.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the current external and internal landscape challenges or the pressures that are on you guys on a day-to-day basis, and more so than ever before. And we're going to take a little bit of a different twist of that in that we've talked a lot about external pressures, but we're also going to talk about the internal ones, the things that are happening in your businesses every day that are putting additional pressures on you from a transfer pricing perspective. And then what are the current systems landscapes that you're faced with, that you have in your companies today, that you're dealing with, that you're trying to work with, that you're trying to get data out of? And that what are those challenges? But we're not going to just stay there with the challenges. We're going to actually move into the space of hopefully we have some innovative solutions. And what are we doing to be practical about those solutions and getting on the ground and running forward with those solutions? So that's kind of the gist of our discussion today. And I'm going to actually let these guys, I thought it might be helpful if you understood. The neat thing about this panel, I think, is that we have a very large global company, which is DuPont. And then we also have a mid-sized company. You would characterize yourself, maybe, yep. Rodrigo? Yeah. At TEREX. So we're going to have a little different perspective in terms of how they're approaching technology implementation and solutions in their space, what they're focusing on and automating, and you'll get a different perspective there. And then Andrew, I won't leave you out over there. Andrew has worked with so many different companies globally, and of course you know he works for Thomson-Reuters. So he's going to share a little bit of a different, unique perspective in terms of the cross companies that he's dealt with and so forth. And maybe I can tee you up to, in the beginning, to share some of that where you think that will bring to bear.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just to give you, a little bit of background. I come from kind of a blended background of transfer pricing consulting services and actually product management. I spent a couple years actually working on the Documenter and Benchmark product. So over my time between those two roles, I've experienced a lot of different transfer pricing softwares, both database and just reporting softwares. So I think that being in some different roles there, I've been able to gather some anecdotal stuff just about some of the challenges, but also some of the advantages of implementing certain transfer pricing software and technology. So I hope to provide a little bit of color on that perspective when it's applicable. But the show's really about these two guys to my left. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to actually bring you to Cristina here. So Cristina, why don't you share a little bit about DuPont and your environment in terms of your people, your transactions, that kind of thing, and then we'll go to systems.
Well, as you said, we're a large corporation, over 200 years around already, and we have presence over, I think, 90 countries around the world. And I think the last time I had the figure was we have approximately 14 billion intercompany transfers. My expertise is primarily in the move of tangible goods. And as you said, we're a large corporation with global supply chains. And as such, we have complex processes around transfer pricing, but we also have automated solution for handling that, although that is being revisited with the One DuPont project that we're undertaking right now. And perhaps in terms of the organization, just to share that is that we have a global team which is clearly responsible for ensuring that our policy gets applied consistently. Oh. Yes.
She's softer than me. Okay.
Is it working now?
Yep.
Yes? Okay. Otherwise you'll be falling asleep.
Rodrigo,
in 2
you
minutes.
might put yours a little bit further too,
Okay.
because you're softer.
All right.
Okay.
I could move mine away if people are just sick of my
To make it comparable.
voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, one of the things I would highlight is that DuPont has different service centers around the globe, and we do have the actual operational transfer pricing centralized. And we have a group of transfer pricing analysts located all together in one of the service centers that are responsible for ensuring that we actually apply our policies and our practices consistently.
How many people are in that group?
I think we're now around 20.
20. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, I think Rodrigo, you want
Sure.
to?
So we were saying, TEREX Corporation it's a smaller company than DuPont. So we're about $7 billion in net revenues for 2013. We operate in 5 different business segments. What I wanted to bring to your attention is that we're a company that we have grown through acquisitions. So what this means for us, for this panel, is that we have multiple ERPs here. I mean, I think a lot of you suffer the same. So we have about more than 8 ERP systems throughout the company. 2 of them being Oracle and SAP are the biggest ones, but we still have to deal with all this data coming from different sources and try to put it together. Also, if you go
Go to the next slide. Yeah.
Here in this slide, I just wanted to point out that we've been growing, through emerging markets, and this makes it, it brings a lot of fun to the job, right? I mean, sometimes, we are all concerned about BEPS, but sometimes, especially when you're looking at some of the Southeast Asia countries or some Eastern European countries, I mean, sometimes I personally think that BEPS may be blessing in disguise, because at least it's going to bring some uniformity, right? At least we know what we are kind of dealing with. Whether in some countries you have just these crazy requirements, or when you're in audit, they may require data or things that we're just not aware. So you cannot prepare, right? So at least you're leveling the ground.
I also know that Rodrigo is trying to use BEPS hopefully as a leverage internally for his discussions.
Oh, yeah.
And also that gets to his business
scared.
case. So he's trying to leverage that more internally for his business case as well. Sorry. And
No,
you have
no,
to
that's
listen
fine.
to Rodrigo very carefully, because he throws in lots of little subtle jokes in there. Just listen very closely.
I miss I'm a very bad joker, I guess. So that's a kind of TEREX Corporation, in an overview. My team, we oversee all intercompany transactions. Again, we're a smaller company, so I guess it's easier for us to look at buy-sell of tangible goods, services, interest rates, royalties, and all other sort of non-recurring transactions.
And that's just a
And that's a
show of
picture,
it.
yeah. I mean, what I wanted to point out with this one is that we have some products that are highly movable, let's say, that we can produce in one plant, kind of export almost around the world. And some of these products, like, these gigantic cranes here, they're not as easy to move, right? So those are the ones that we need to have more, the manufacturing plant closer to where our clients are. And there's not a picture here, but also some port cranes that are just gigantic. I mean, you may see some on the Jersey port or one of the big ports. Those are goods that you cannot move. And we know with these products you have some interesting challenges with IP, because sometimes, whenever you leave the businesses to do, to go and sell and do whatever they can to, bring revenues up, they can be really creative sometimes, and they may move production lines from countries without really having consideration on the tax issues that can create.
Thank you. One quick question before I move on for both of you, Christina and Rodrigo. And Sam kind of teed it up. It made me think of it. I always like to hear what companies have internally for their structure to be able to leverage anything, to get any IT help or to get their implementation projects in place. I think, Rodrigo, you might work with Al and kind of explain that little, how you guys work together to try to...
Well, I mean, something that can be probably, I don't know if it's unique, but probably particular to TEREX is that, again, we're a smaller company, so I guess at some point, instead of relying on third parties to do all this implementation, the company decided to get an internal resource which has the right knowledge for, with tax and technology processes. And that was
Which is a strange thing, right?
Yeah, so that was my colleague that was talking to you guys about in the morning, Al Costa. So basically what we're doing is that Al is helping me he's really looking at the, different platforms, ERPs, how to combine all this together. And I'm more like I'm kind of trying to design the car, right? I'm like, hey, Al, I would like to have, automatic windows and a sunroof and et cetera. So I'm asking for the Ferrari, and he's trying to deliver a Scion, But so I think it's that.
Where is he?
he's gone. That's what I'm saying. Don't tell him. But no, so the idea is for us to work. We really are a team, right?
Okay, great.
So I take care of because Al is gonna bring me the data, and now we have to. Okay, now that we have the data, now we're gonna do with it, right? Now you have to be careful what you wish for, right? So
yeah. So, and Christina, how about you?
In our case, in particularly in the One DuPont project, we clearly have both aspects represented. Although it may have started primarily as an IT-led project, we do have a strong presence of the process people, like myself. I'm not so much the technology side, but there is clearly a collaboration between both sides. I agree with you, and I think the IT part of the house does a great job also at challenging to us, do you really need the Ferrari? and that's something that somebody was alluding to in one of the earlier panels, saying don't simply try to automate what you have. I mean, if you're going to go through such a project, really stop, think through, even start from a blank page, rethinking all of your processes, because actually you may be striving for the Ferrari when ultimately you only need
you probably don't need it.
BMW, or I don't know. I'm European.
There you go, Frank.
So I think, but it clearly is a collaboration. I mean, you need both sides of the house working jointly together.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
And Kelly, and sometimes not even tax and IT, but even above us is the management, top management, right? So I guess when we were discussing about this panel with Christine and all of you guys, it's like if you don't have the support of the top management, this is kind of it's hard to implement, right? Because it's not tax. This is really not a tax exercise. This is more like a business transformation exercise, and the organization needs to understand it like that. Because it's not only we're not doing this just to produce better documentation, and that would be, we would not be adding any value. It would be really hard for us to sell if that's our goal. So the goal is more like business transformation with tax benefits.
Yeah.
We agree. Go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to add, I mean, and really when you think about the type of role that we're talking about, it's not routine. It's not a typical role that exists in the vast majority of corporations. So you're right in that it does come down to kind of buy-in from management to kind of not necessarily give the go-ahead or the green light, but to understand that tax and IT, two departments that may not have typically had a lot of collaborative efforts before, do need to sit down, do need to carve out some time to wrap your heads around the business requirements and kind of the overall goal of the process.
Great, good. All right, I'm just going to touch briefly on, I know we've spent a lot of time this morning on the external pressures, right? I think we're all pretty clear in terms of the amount of heightened awareness because of the external environment issues. I think a good indication of that, I was in London a few weeks ago, and I always think about, like, you as tax professionals and transfer pricing professionals, you go out for a cocktail party or you go out for a happy hour or a dinner or something, and people that don't know you very well yet are trying to get to know you, so they ask you, what do you do for your work? And you start to explain it to them, and all of a sudden the eyes get glazed over and they don't really know what to say to you. So I was kind of surprised when a few weeks ago I was in London and I was taking a taxi ride, and the cab driver started talking to me about, what do I do for a living? So I told him, and he was like, transfer pricing? Really? And so then he starts to go into a diatribe about Starbucks as we pass by one, and saying how he'll never buy coffee at Starbucks because they don't want to pay their tax. It's like the most amazing paradigm shift, I think, in terms of awareness in the community, the politics around it, and the things that are getting brought to the table that we never saw before. So I won't go into that in great detail, other than I'm going to ask these guys in a second in terms of the external factors that are driving their change internally. But I do want to touch base real quick on the internal factors and the internal pressures, because we don't think of those a lot. And our ability to respond to those pressures through our systems, landscape, and environment, and our transfer pricing, it can be altered significantly, or you're unable to respond in a meaningful way. So some of those things could be simply business things like an acquisition. So you might be a tangible goods company, and now you've got a financial services arm. And perhaps you have intercompany loans that you haven't had to deal with before. Or perhaps you're bringing on we're working with a major retailer right now, and they've brought on a whole new shoe line of business that's got perhaps a different transactional structure. Or maybe it has a different risk profile altogether than you're used to dealing with. So these things can be a significant change for the transfer pricing department. It could also be headcount reductions, organizational optimization and re-engineering, other things that are affecting you from a transfer pricing perspective. So I just kind of wanted to tee up a little bit of that for you guys, where any of those internal or external pressures, or a combination of both, in that perfect storm, if you will, that triggered some of the business transformational changes or automation projects that you guys are working on. And we're going to get to the definition of what they're doing in a moment. But sorry, I should have teed you up.
Yeah, that's okay. So in our case, well, I think we're all aware, and we've been discussing through the day today about the external factors. In the case of DuPont, I would highlight primarily, I've been 11 years with DuPont, but over the past few years, I think that's where I've seen the company being so much more active in terms of the portfolio management. So that obviously brings new challenges, to your point, and we've had acquisitions in the past years, and how to really integrate those to ensure that now we are still one global process and one global practice. And from a technology perspective, obviously that also brings newer challenges. We don't have 8 ERP systems as RODRIGO, but clearly when you're going through the divestitures and acquisitions processes, you most likely are going to end up with different applications and different ERP foundations. So again, the automation on how to get the data out of those ERP systems becomes even more critical, because you really want to shift your organization, from managing the 20+ Excel spreadsheets to really analyzing the data, so that it doesn't take you so much time to retrieve all the information. And I think that's not only much more value adding, but also a little bit less frustrating.
And Rodrigo, I think you mentioned BEPS, country by country reporting, and also acquisitions. I don't know if you want to elaborate on those, or also
sure,
other
yeah.
ones.
I mean, when we started to look at this project, the operational transfer pricing, it was actually before BEPS. And some of the factors that we're trying to control is, I mean, here it says external, but I think it's external because it's not a transfer pricing factor, but it's still a tax factor, which is customs and VAT. So, we kind of had, as many of you probably, we were looking at our intercompany prices, or we were looking at our intercompany transactions, and then we had adjustments throughout the year, right? 2, 1, depending on the year. So the problem with a transfer pricing adjustment is that this is for income tax purposes, right? So you put the transfer pricing adjustment, and you get to your right taxable income, and kind of end of story. But when you look at customs and VAT, especially outside of the U.S., again, there's some other regions highly aggressive on this, that they may even impose personal penalties, jail time to people, right? Mm-hmm. So, because if I'm doing an adjustment, usually an adjustment is going to decrease a profit in one place and increase it in some other country, right? So when you have, it's like a natural stress between income tax and customs, right? Because income tax, everything else remains constant, right? Ceteris paribus, they want the highest profit available. So that would mean if you are buying a good, to have the lowest price possible, so you have the highest margin, and then you're paying a lot of taxes. Whether customs it's just the opposite, right? They want the highest price possible in customs, so you pay as much as you can. So for us, we identified that because we were having some large adjustments. So we wanted to minimize all that waste that we were having in customs and VAT, because if you pay less customs, then you're going to have some penalties, and then you can go, and some countries require you to open all your invoices and kind of adjust invoice by invoice. Again, very painful, very time-consuming.
Very painful.
And that's cost.
Where's Mike Killian at? He loves the invoicing process.
Right.
So,
and that's costly, right?
Yeah.
And then if you kind of overpaid customs, then good luck trying to go and get a refund, right? I mean, so it was just a waste of resources. So customs and VAT was a big selling point for us. Now with BEPS and country by country, now we can reinforce the relevance and the importance and the risk associated with these transactions.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. Okay, and so Frank, this is your, Frank helped me with this great diagram here. Basically, I'm just going to kind of tee up that, what you guys see out there in terms of your systems landscapes today, kind of the current state, if you will, and what the challenges are for those. And then I'm going to ask the panel to kind of share their current landscape so that you can get a feel for that and what they're working with, okay? So really, I think of kind of the systems landscapes out there are very diverse. However, I kind of put them into 2 buckets. I always try to categorize everything in my mind so that I can even deal with it. But basically, I think there's one bucket, and Al earlier said, I don't think anyone's on one ERP system, but there are those folks. Now, it might be a little bit of a misnomer, if you will, because some of them might be on one SAP platform, for example, but they might be on 5 instances. Okay, and they might be on 5 separate instances globally. Perhaps they have 3 regional and 1 global and another instance. But they might also be on different versions of SAP. So there could be some flavors there. But the other category would be kind of the more realistic, I think, that you guys are facing or dealing with. And this is this great graphic that Frank's created. So sorry to steal it from you. But I think it shows you, and I wish I had a lavalier, but I like to stand up. Let me know if you can't hear me. I'll talk loud. But basically, if you look at this bottom layer here, this is really all your data sources, right? And they're in most organizations, there's a lot of them. Not just, one ERP system. Okay, if you look here, there's multiple lower level ERP systems. You could have them, an ERP system in every location globally. You could have different ERP systems from all the acquisitions that you had. Your new acquisition probably had a different ERP system.
Yep.
So you can have multiple ERP systems. You also can have other databases. I think, Sonny, you mentioned access databases. you're not alone. That's most companies. They have access. They have SQL databases. They have many different databases at a very low level. Some are at very low level of detail, and some are a little bit higher. There's also your master data set, CRM data, HR data. You could have BI tools in here, okay? And then if you look at the next layer up, a lot of this data from the local country across the organization is getting aggregated somehow and consolidated. Some of you are using specialized consolidation tools. Most of you are probably using Hyperion and others, okay? Right? And then somewhere in here, some of you that are lucky probably have some business warehousing and other data marts and business warehousing that you can leverage for transfer pricing, okay? And you might be pulling Hyperion retrieve queries and other things to get the data out. And like Jen mentioned earlier, you can probably get access to that data somehow. The challenge is, oh, and I forgot these guys over here, you might have like supply chain data, might have pricing databases, you might have material codes, SKU data that are on totally separate systems. So they could be on the same systems or they could be totally separate. So somehow getting all this data consolidated so that you can use it and leverage it. The challenge for transfer pricing, folks, I think, is that you have to get, first, I think the first step, Christine and I were talking about this, is you need tax sensitized data first, right? So you need to tax sensitize the data, and then you need to transfer price that, sensitize that data. So it's a multi-layered process. It's much more complex than your regular compliance folks have to deal with on a regular basis. So you're taking management and operational structures from your general ledger and from Hyperion, consolidated. And typically you're using information from this layer and also this layer, and you're trying to map it and transform it so that you can use it in a meaningful way. You're calculating it, you're truly transforming that data, okay? And then the only thing I think I needed to add to this picture, which I didn't, Frank, and I should have, is the thousands of Excel spreadsheets that we're all using around this data source to do that transformation of the data for transfer pricing. Because that's typically where a lot of it's happening today, unless some of you have been able to be a little bit more savvy and have been able to do some of it in your BI tools. Or as Christine is going to share, she's done some in a homegrown system as well. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and, Christina, why don't you share a little bit about that, your current system environment now. Mm-hmm. And then in a second we'll talk about what you guys are working on. So this is the current state of your systems environment.
Well, in our case, as you said, we had our home inside built solution, but I'd like, you know, from a transfer pricing perspective, obviously I refer, but what I'd like is to emphasize the importance of the tax sensitization of the data. And, you know, our structures, we have multifunction legal entities. We do manufacture the same product in multiple locations around the world. So one of the key aspects towards being capable of afterwards doing some sort of transfer pricing reporting was having the traceability of who truly was the financial source or the balance profit for a particular product. And obviously that, we're not going to get it through whatever transfer pricing tool we implement. We need to have that tax sensitization in the ERP system in the first place as we track and we move goods around our supply chain. So in our case, that was a characteristic that we currently had in our current ERP version, because to your point, there's different versions out there as well. And one of the key learnings that we had through the One DuPont project was that whereas the rest of finance was coming to the table to ruthlessly simplify complexity, we in tax, who were very active, and we are very active in this project, we actually had a contradictory priority, because we wanted to keep that level of detail and that level of complexity so that we were capable of extracting reports afterwards. The good news is we've been able, for our future design, to still maintain that traceability without requiring a core modification to our SAP, which is the ERP that we're using. So that's kind of more or less the current state.
Okay, and Rodrigo, and then I'm going to come back to ask you the challenges of that current state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Well, in our case, I mentioned that we have multiple ERPs. So right now we're focusing on Oracle. So we're extracting all the data from Oracle, and as Jen was mentioning, we have had the answer of no, that data is not, we cannot extract that specific data that we want, right? Because right now we don't have the detail that we want to have in order to have segmented P&Ls by product and all that beauty, right? So so we're focusing on Oracle as previous panel was mentioning. I mean, this is a 3 to 5 year project, right? So what we're doing right now is like Sonny was mentioning, I mean, we do have some bridge right now between Oracle and how do we want to uniform the data that the different business units are providing to us, the data that we're harvesting, and we're doing that through it's kind of an Excel platform. I mean, I think Excel is just the interface, and then the data goes into this warehouse, and then it gets ripped into different activities, segments, etc.
Okay, good, thanks. And Andrew, I don't know if you want to share anything there yet, or come back.
Well, I mean, in my experience in the past couple of years, I was working on this one client that was acquisitive and kind of had a big acquisition, and there was kind of a merger of two ERP systems, and I mean, it was purely Excel based, and in getting down to a segmented P&L where you're sourcing materials from different manufacturing sites, and it's being distributed to different different countries and locations around the world. You're talking 10, 20 megabyte Excel files, sometimes linking directly to HFM. So just if you have 20 to 30 to 40 entities, each one in one of these huge Excel files, I mean, it could take anywhere from 10 to 20 or more minutes just to update and refresh the data. So a very cumbersome process. But again, that's purely Excel. Now, if there's opportunities to take a more automated approach using more powerful software, I mean, you think about the amount of time that you're saving, whether it's from a client billable hour perspective or just from an internal tax perspective. It's pretty. It's pretty robust and pretty, huge to maintain otherwise.
I think that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
no, go ahead.
I think it's a great point, because for us, it has taken us about 3 to 4 years to kind of educate our business units, our controllers, etc., to how, what the data is important, how do we want it, etc. And for us, I mean, even with that experience, it still takes us about 6 to 7 weeks to, when we send the templates and they, I'm too busy, then they reply with the templates, and we go back and forth with questions, etc. So again, it takes us about 7 weeks just to do that. And the idea.
Is that annually, or on what frequency?
We try it twice a year, but again, it just takes too long, right? So sometimes we have to require some assumptions whenever we're doing with. At mid-year, we're trying not to be as detailed as the ones that we do before year-end, right? So, so also part of the ideas of using OXP is to reduce that from 7 weeks to 1 or 2 days. I mean, that would be, as we were saying, I don't know what I'm going to do with all that free available time, right? I mean, go crazy, or I don't know, start learning somewhere. But anyway, it's just that time that you're saving, that you don't have to deal with getting your data, and you can go and worry about BEPS and all that beautiful initiatives that are out there. Yeah.
And Rodrigo, just one other thing. When sending out all of those templates, these huge files, to get feedback and input, I would imagine another concern is just versioning, or the responder making little tweaks to the file that potentially weren't necessarily requested, and then you're kind of left to receive the file and kind of do that sort of cleanup, which is just that's a time killer in itself right there.
Yep.
And I think, you know, I'm sure you can think of 1,000 things to do with that extra free time that you would gain with OXP, but clearly it's going back to what we discussed earlier, having a more proactive approach rather than being so reactive. So if you can actually produce your segmented P&L, and I know this sounds like paradise for perhaps some organizations, but if you can do that even on a monthly basis, we touched also earlier about avoiding surprises, about you know, staying focused on your outlooks and your forecasts. So being capable of doing that active monitoring on a much more frequent basis, even you know, catching up with some of the transfer pricing resets or smaller adjustments, so that you would avoid self-initiated or a retroactive adjustment at the end of the year. Well, that clearly is something to consider.
And,
Yeah, I mean,
and one more thing before I leave the current environments. Christina, we talked a little bit about one of the key pain points having, you know, your segmented P&L essentially be a black box. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit, you know, and what your goal would be there?
Well, in our case, as I said, we are capable of producing that today. We just had to constantly continue to educate and share with the rest of our project team why that was important and why that visibility and traceability we needed to maintain it going forward. But yes, it seems that it's a difficult task to get, especially if you have, as I said, multiple multifunction entities, which is our case. We have a lot of our entities are actually distributors and manufacturers and even a commission agent within the same entity. So.
Okay, thanks. Rodrigo, did you have one?
Yeah,
more?
just to expand on some of the Christina's points. One of the goals that we had whenever we were looking into embarking into operational transfer pricing and then using, you know, this particular software was to minimize transfer pricing adjustments by maximizing intercompany pricing corrections. And the idea being that transfer pricing adjustment understanding as, the adjustment that goes for income tax purposes, that is going to be somehow disruptive to the P&Ls and then managing, reporting and all that. And as Christina was saying, right, the goal is to be proactive, right? So getting there during budget, as I heard, these are the targets for your activity, you know, your functions and risk in specific areas. This is your target. Being able to monitor that every quarter, right, in 2 days, clicking, and then if you need to change to adjust the pricing instead of doing the transfer pricing adjustment, correct the intercompany pricing. So you minimize all that waste that you have in customs and VAT.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, I'm just going to I'm going to get to what you guys are implementing because we're having great discussions, but I want to make sure we get to all the solutions as well. So we talked earlier, I think, Andrew, in your presentation, you kind of outlined what the three new innovations, if you will, in the technology innovation space for transfer pricing. And they're categorized in this way in the industry now through the workflow, through the documentation and benchmarking, and then through the new term operational transfer pricing, which is really the implementation and monitoring, or active monitoring, Christina said, of your policy that's been implemented. So I'm going to ask these guys to share a little bit about what they've been working on in terms of automating within their companies and what they've focused on. So Christina, I know you've taken a little bit of a different approach, and she's got a much larger company, so we're going to get a little bit of a different perspective here that I think you'll find interesting. I think that Christina's approach is a little bit more forward-thinking in terms of, or strategic is how they focused first, instead of more on like a key risk area only. So it's that discussion, you know, are you taking little bites, or we're going back to that crazy analogy. We need a new analogy or something. It's good. It's good. It's everyone can remember it. Everyone can remember it. So, you know, are you taking on, you know, a large a transformational project, or are you, focusing on a particular risk area after doing some extensive risk analysis and so forth, or taking off what you can chew or bite off what you can chew within your own political organization as well? Things will come up maybe in the business case discussion as well, what you can actually get through within your organization. So, Christina, why don't you share first, like, what have you been working on?
I think in my case, or for the transfer pricing department, has been a little bit easier, meaning that we're just part of this huge transformational project, or this holistic approach that is looking into the ERP system and all the transformation.
And what are the teams that have come together for this again? Can you restate that?
Well, I think it's really as if I typically try to explain it when people ask me, what do I do for living, or what am I doing in the U.S., as they say. It's clearly like having a smaller, it's as if you would take DuPont and create a smaller scale of DuPont itself. So we really have representation from all the groups. And again, somebody was alluding to this earlier. I think that tax would sometimes typically come at last and get involved in these projects as they're close to completion, and then it's more what are we left with, or what data can we utilize. In this sense, I think this is the project that I'm right now working on is very unique, because we're there from the very beginning, and I think that's something critical to be at the table from the very start. And in our case, the nature of the project itself really just posed us the question of, do we rebuild our own solution, or do we look at, implementing, in our case, we made our choice to implement the OOXP. And I think one of the beauties is that it allows for multiple ERPs. So every time you go through, again, a portfolio initiative, you don't have to revisit all your system architecture, and you can really focus more on the tasks that would really bring value, rather than rethinking all of your IT landscape.
Rodrigo?
I mean, in our case, I guess, also the goal is the elephant, right? And we have to go for the elephant, but piece by piece, right? As I was saying, I mean, we look at this as an operational transformation. I mean, before we kind of put this initiative in the table, our FP&A department, they may have an idea of the system margin, but they were not really looking at the whole supply chain. They are kind of losing pieces. And our company is kind of decentralized, so sometimes you have local factories, or they really look themselves as one operational unit rather than part of a company, right, of a multinational company. So sometimes people were wasting too much energy on intercompany pricing, right? Trying to, instead of trying to produce your good at the lowest cost possible, they were trying to sell at the highest price possible to their intercompanies, right? Or a distributor trying to buy at the lowest price, but So, so the idea is to get good financial data that is going to give to our top management the right profitability by product, by line, we want to go all the way, SKU.
Yeah, so he wants to go to the SKU level too.
That's the goal. That's what I'm saying. That's the elephant that we're really shooting for, the elephant. Now, whether we accomplish that or not, that I can talk about it in 6 years from now, and I'll let you know. But that's the idea. Right?
Okay, great. Yeah. And I think, Christina, if you could also share how you guys have looked at it a little bit differently in terms of staffing, processes, technology, so it's a little bit more holistic approach.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key aspects, right? Technology is very important, but it's one piece of one portion of the cake. You need the staffing model to support that technology. So the project that I'm working on right now is clearly that technology that should enable for further analytics, etc. But that doesn't go anywhere if we don't have the right staffing. And I think the key aspect of having more of a centralized organization rather than a decentralized is because it helps put around the technology, the processes, and the governance that needs to be to go together with the technology implementation. So I think we're looking into maintaining that structure which we currently have, but with different technology and internal controls.
Okay. And so the goals of your project, I know we talked a little bit about, you're trying to get to a segmented P&L and the level of detail. What about the additional benefits and the additional value? I know we talked a little bit about VAT, customs. Maybe you can expand on that. I know we haven't talked a lot about that today in terms of how those play into the mix and the real benefits you can get out of that full end-to-end automation and ongoing monitoring.
Well, I think in our case, and I think it was Jen or somebody earlier mentioned this, I think once you've put the data together from a transfer pricing perspective, there are a lot of other customers, internal customers, that start looking at that data that they didn't realize they didn't have a value for it, but now that they have it, like getting an easier way to look at your overall end-to-end supply chain and really understanding from the very beginning until the actual sale to the outside customer. I think that's something that once you have the data, you start realizing how much other analytics and reporting you can do out of it. That is not necessarily just for the transfer pricing or the tax department. It's more your management reporting team working with the businesses, and I think that's what I'd highlight, besides VAT and customs, obviously, which Rodrigo has mentioned.
Yeah.
No, and I agree with you. I mean, it's better data not only for tax, but for management reporting. It's better governance. It's a very critical aspect also of this initiative, governance. Having better decision making for the presidents, right, the segment presidents, about what product lines are really profitable, what product lines are not, and not just because there's some transfer pricing noise during the supply chain. And FP&A gets also. I mean, it's a multidisciplinary initiative that is going to really benefit the company, not one department.
Great. Andrew, anything else on that?
Well, I just think it's interesting that kind of the origin of, the underlying operational transfer pricing system was obviously developed and thought of very much related to the concept of transfer pricing and tax. But I think, as time progresses and we start to see some different instances of, approaching an operational way to do transfer pricing, we're seeing the broader implications. And it is, right, like a complete infrastructure management and changing up the way that you may look at your business as a whole. So it's almost evolving, beyond transfer pricing itself. I just think that's kind of an interesting, an interesting element to this. And while there are a lot of challenges to getting to a good place, you can definitely see the potential payout, once you do get there.
So I want to ask the audience, do you guys have any questions for these guys?
We share everything what has been mentioned. I have a question particular to both of you when it comes to staffing. You mentioned once TP analysts. So I'm wondering, when you look for new people, for new team members, what do you look for? Transfer price manager, transfer price financial analyst, whatever, because in my view, this role of operational transfer pricing manager, if you post a position somewhere, and you do not want to get the typical Big Four candidates applying for these positions, so you do not want to get the tax guys. How do you name this position? And what are the key skills you see for such a role in these kind of activities you do?
Do you want to go first? Well, that's a very, very good question, actually, because I think, at least in my experience and what I've seen with DuPont, is that all sorts of different backgrounds and different professionals, let's say, end up in transfer pricing. So it's kind of difficult to put out there what should be the role. We actually call it transfer pricing analyst, and I think clearly you want to have some economic background and understanding, good analytical capabilities. In our case, focusing more in the operational transfer pricing, I think you would want that person also to be detail-oriented, since in our case we do manage things down at the SKU or the material level. So I think those would be the aspects that I would highlight, but I agree with you that the staffing of the team is a tough task, because again, there's not only one answer. We have people with multiple backgrounds that have decided to grow in the transfer pricing area, and all those different backgrounds are really actually valid. So I don't know what's your experience.
No, yes, good question. I mean, I think in our case it's the same. It's a multidisciplinary. It's not necessarily. When transfer pricing started, a lot of companies were looking for economies, right? So so we had a job, right? But so I guess for here, detail-oriented, as Christina mentioned, detail-oriented, and well, in our case, we also wanted someone with good, with understanding of technology. Because if they were going to be as inefficient as I am with Excel, then was going to be a lot of help. So detail-oriented and good with technology, and the background can be accounting, finance, economics, and it's not a particular background that we're looking for.
But no lawyer or something like this.
I'm sorry?
Also, we do have some people in our team that have more of a law background. Yes.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, in our team we have economists. We have one of our team members is doing it's not a lawyer yet, but he's working on that. Accountants and IT background.
Anyone else? Gina, Ian? No? How about just before we close, are we all done? Yeah. One last thing. Any major challenges to getting your technology projects in place and kicking them off, or anything you want to share as your biggest challenge that you've had to overcome, or maybe that you're still facing?
I guess I'd comment that don't underestimate the education effort. I think still transfer pricing is very unknown. It just has personally me surprised how much time I had to invest in explaining why, what is it, why do we need this, and I think it's just, you just have to dial in that into your project plan as part of
I think Rodrigo says everyone in his company basically says, well, I have a left pocket or right pocket.
Right.
Yeah.
So
what do you care?
What's the issue?
Gonna
Why
get
do you care?
eliminated. Why do I
Yeah.
care?
Yeah. So good. That's a good point. Anything else, guys?
No, I
Yeah.
guess we're in the same lines. I mean, it is a multidisciplinary approach. Even though we are working on for the same company, same team, we may understand. It can be the same concept, but people can have a very different understanding of what a particular concept like functional analysis or even the margin, right? What that means. And again, it's very different how accounting approaches to the company pricing, to treasury, to IT. So you just that can be a challenge, but it can be overcome, as Christina was saying, with good communication. And time.
And time. And patience.
Patience. Lots of patience.
All right,
or
that's
tequila,
it, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.